They had always been inseparable, a couple whose love story began decades ago. It was a classic tale of young love, with all the excitement, joy, and adventure that came with it. They first met when they were both in their early 20s. She was vibrant and full of energy, with a kind smile that made everyone around her feel at ease. He, on the other hand, was quieter, but had a charm that came from his sincerity and strong sense of responsibility. It didn't take long for them to realize they were meant to be together. Their early days together were filled with late-night talks, shared dreams, and a growing bond that only deepened with time. They had so much in common and yet complemented each other in ways they never expected. They quickly became best friends, always sharing everything from their hopes and fears to their greatest joys and disappointments. Together, they navigated the challenges life threw their way, from financial struggles to family issues, always with a sense of unity and love. The couple married after a few years of dating, starting a family soon after. Their love grew stronger with each passing year, and they became the kind of couple everyone admired. To those who knew them, they were the perfect example of true love, a relationship built on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. They made a home together, raised their children, and shared countless beautiful moments, each one weaving a tapestry of memories that would last a lifetime. As the years went by, their life together seemed picture-perfect. They traveled, explored new places, and celebrated each milestone with gratitude. Their love never seemed to fade. If anything, it grew more profound as they grew older. They were each other's greatest support system. Even when their children grew up and moved away, their bond remained unshakable. But as with all things, time has a way of changing people. Now, in their mid-70s, the couple's health was starting to decline. The husband had been battling a long-term illness, and the wife had been by his side, caring for him with the same love and dedication she had shown their entire life together. There was something peaceful about the way they spent their last years together. Their conversations, although quieter, were still filled with the same affection that had marked their younger years. However, there was a quiet, lingering tension that seemed to hang in the air. The husband couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something felt different. It wasn't the kind of difference that was easy to pinpoint. It was more of a feeling, a subtle change in his wife's behavior that left him wondering if there was something more to their story than he had realized. She had always been loving, always so open with him, but lately, she had been more distant. It wasn't anything dramatic, just small things. A pause in conversation, a glance that seemed to hide something deeper. He brushed it off, attributing it to the stress of his illness and the inevitable worries that came with facing the end. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He began to wonder if there was a part of her life he had never truly known. Was it just the illness playing tricks on his mind, or was there really something he had never understood about the woman he had loved for more than half a century? Despite this, he remained focused on the love they had shared, the memories they had built, and the life they had created together. Little did he know, his world was about to be turned upside down just days before his passing. The truth, a truth so shocking, was something he could never have expected. The husband's health had been deteriorating for a while now, and it was becoming more and more evident that his time was running out. The doctor had gently explained the situation to both of them several months ago. There wasn't much more they could do for him, except to make him as comfortable as possible. It was a conversation they both dreaded, but one that they knew was inevitable. The couple had always been realistic, and the wife was determined to do everything she could to make his remaining days peaceful. During this time, the wife never left his side. She took care of him with an unwavering dedication that reflected the love they had shared for more than 55 years. Each day, she prepared his meals, ensured he took his medications, and provided the comfort of her presence. Despite the heaviness of the situation, there was a quiet calm in their home. They spent their days reminiscing about their past, laughing at old jokes, and talking about things they had never discussed before. There was a deep sense of connection between them, even as his strength faded. Every morning, he would wake up to find her sitting by his bedside, her gentle smile offering a sense of warmth. She would hold his hand and whisper soft words of reassurance, reminding him that everything would be okay. It was as though she was trying to fill his last days with as much love and tenderness as she could, knowing time was running out. Despite the sadness of the situation, he found comfort in her care and her constant presence. Yet, even as she cared for him with such devotion, he couldn't ignore the subtle changes in her behavior. There were moments when she seemed distant, lost in thought, as though her mind was somewhere far away. Her usual vibrant personality, the one that had always filled their home with energy and light, seemed to have dimmed slightly. She would still do everything for him, but there was a noticeable difference, a slight hesitation in her actions, a pause before she responded to him. The husband tried not to let it bother him. After all, the stress of caring for someone with a terminal illness wasn't easy, and he knew it must be weighing heavily on her. She had always been his rock, and he knew she had been holding everything together for both of them. But at times, when he looked at her, he felt a strange sense of unease, as if there was something she wasn't telling him, something she was keeping to herself. There were nights when he would lie awake, listening to the soft sound of her breathing as she slept beside him. The room would be quiet, save for the occasional rustle of the sheets or the soft creak of the house settling. He would watch her, wondering what thoughts might be running through her mind. She had always been so open with him in the past, so why was she holding back now? As he lay there, it became clear to him that he had lived a long and full life, but there were still questions lingering in his mind. Questions about his wife, about their past, and about the things she might have kept hidden from him. He never imagined that in his final days, he would be confronted with a truth that would change everything he thought he knew about her. As the days passed, the husband couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a nagging sensation in the back of his mind. He had always trusted his wife, relied on her for everything, but recently, there was a shift in the air between them. She was still there for him, caring for him as she always had, but it was different now. The warmth in her eyes seemed to fade at times, replaced by a distant look that he had never seen before. It wasn't that she was neglecting him. No, she was as attentive as ever, making sure he had everything he needed, ensuring his comfort in the smallest ways. But in the silence that often filled their home, the husband began to notice how she would sometimes lose herself in thought, staring out the window or looking at nothing in particular. She wasn't as talkative as before. The laughter that had once filled the rooms of their home was becoming a rare sound. Even when she did speak, her words seemed less certain, as though she were carefully choosing each one, as though something was weighing on her. In the past, they had always shared everything: joys, worries, dreams, and even fears. They had always been a team, leaning on each other when times were tough. But now it felt as if there were an invisible barrier between them, one he couldn't cross. It wasn't a barrier of anger or resentment, but something else, something unspoken. He began to wonder if it had always been there, hidden beneath the surface of their perfect life, and he simply never saw it. Every time he asked her if something was wrong, she would smile softly and shake her head, assuring him that everything was fine. But there was a hesitation in her voice, a subtle pause before she answered, and that, more than anything else, made him uneasy. The husband tried to convince himself that he was imagining things, that the stress of his illness and the inevitable end were clouding his judgment. After all, they had been married for over 55 years, and in all that time, they had been open with each other. There was no reason to believe that anything had changed now, especially not at the end. But the more he thought about it, the more it troubled him. He couldn't help but wonder if there was something she hadn't told him. Something from her past that she had kept hidden, something she didn't want him to know. Maybe it wasn't anything serious, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Was there something important about her that he had never understood? Or had he missed something all these years, something she had deliberately kept from him? One evening, As they sat together in the living room, he watched her intently, studying her face as she absent-mindedly folded laundry. She was still beautiful, still the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago, but there was a sadness behind her eyes that he couldn't ignore. She caught him looking at her and gave him a small, reassuring smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was then that he realized something. The distance he felt wasn't just something in his mind. It was real, and it had been growing for some time. He didn't know what to do with this feeling. Should he press her for answers, or was it better to leave things as they were, to enjoy their remaining time together without dredging up painful truths? Deep down, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face whatever it was she was hiding, but he knew that something had changed. It was becoming clear that the wife who had always shared everything with him was now holding back something. Something that could either explain the distance between them or shatter everything he thought he knew about their life together. One afternoon, as the husband was going through a drawer looking for some of his old medical papers, he found something he wasn't expecting. Hidden beneath a stack of receipts and bills was an old dusty box, carefully tucked away. The box wasn't large, just a small, unassuming container, but something about it caught his eye. He paused for a moment, wondering why it had been placed there. He had never seen it before, and it didn't look like something his wife would have left out. His curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the box. Inside, he found a collection of letters, old photographs, and several folded pieces of paper that seemed to have been written in a hurry. He carefully sifted through the items, his heart beginning to race as he realized that some of the photographs were not just of his wife, but of a younger woman he didn't recognize. There were pictures of her with other people, some of them appearing to be from places and times he couldn't remember her ever mentioning. The letters, written in elegant handwriting, spoke of someone deeply in love, someone with a past that seemed to be at odds with the woman he had spent decades with. His hands trembled as he turned the pages, piecing together fragments of a life that seemed to exist outside the life he knew. The letters were filled with mentions of a person he didn't know, someone who had been important to her, but someone whose name was never mentioned in their conversations. The more he read, the more he felt his stomach tighten, and the weight of uncertainty began to settle heavily on his chest. He wasn't sure what to make of it all, but he couldn't ignore the fact that something wasn't adding up. There were also old, faded photographs of his wife with a man he had never seen before. They were laughing, holding hands, and even sharing intimate moments. Nothing that seemed inappropriate, but enough to make him wonder. He looked closely at each photograph, his mind racing. Was this someone from her past? Was there something about her life before they met that she had never shared with him? He quickly closed the box and put it back in the drawer. His heart was racing, and his mind was spinning with confusion and disbelief. He couldn't help but wonder why she had hidden this from him. All these years together, and he had never known about this part of her life. Had she really kept this secret all this time? And if so, why? The questions started to pile up, but there were no answers in the box, only more questions. Later that evening, when his wife sat by his side, offering him his medication and helping him get comfortable, he couldn't stop thinking about the box. The way she had been acting, the subtle distance, the moments when her mind seemed to drift, now seemed to make sense. There was something she wasn't telling him, something that had been buried for years. The wife he had known, the woman who had shared everything with him, now felt like a stranger, and he didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. As she leaned down to kiss his forehead and tell him she loved him, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He still loved her with all his heart, but now he needed answers. He needed to understand what had been hidden and why it had taken so long for the truth to come to light. But as the night went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, whatever it was, would change everything he thought he knew about their life together. That night, as the husband lay in bed, his mind was racing. The box and its contents haunted him. The photographs, the letters, and the person in them, all of it weighed heavily on him. He knew he couldn't keep quiet about this forever. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things left unsaid. But how could he bring it up? How could he confront her after so many years of happiness, only to be faced with a truth that could unravel everything? The next morning, as they sat together at the breakfast table, he could barely look at her. She was sitting across from him, as warm and familiar as ever, but now she seemed distant, like someone he didn't fully know. His heart was torn. He loved her with all his being, but the pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and he couldn't put them together without her help. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. His voice was low and shaky, as if the words themselves were heavy with emotion. "There's something I found yesterday," he said, his eyes on the table, unable to meet hers. He paused, his chest tightening. A box, and inside it, photographs, letters. From a time before we met. Her face froze for a moment, and he could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes. She didn't say anything right away, and the silence between them felt unbearable. He looked up at her, his heart pounding. "Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me about this part of your life?" Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup of tea, and for a moment he thought she might not answer him at all. But then, with a deep sigh, she set the cup down and looked at him. Her eyes were filled with something he couldn't quite name. Guilt, sadness, maybe even fear. "I never meant to hide anything from you," she began, her voice soft but steady. "It's just that there are parts of my past that I'd never shared with anyone, not even you. I didn't want to burden you with them. I wanted us to have our own story, free from the mistakes and regrets that came before." He listened, his heart still heavy with confusion. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully, as if she were afraid of what the truth might bring. He could tell that whatever she was about to say was going to be difficult for both of them. She continued, "The man in those pictures, he was a part of my life before I met you. I thought I had left that behind. But the truth is, it was something that haunted me for a long time. I didn't want to carry it into our marriage, into our life together. I thought it was best to keep it all hidden." The husband sat back in his chair, processing her words. The shock of the revelation was still settling in, but he was starting to understand her better. The woman he had known for so many years, the woman who had always been there for him, had a past filled with its own pain and struggles. "I wasn't sure how to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly now. "I was afraid of how you might look at me, of what this could do to us. I didn't want to risk losing everything we've built together." There was a long pause as they both sat in the quiet of the room, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. The husband could see the honesty in her eyes, the vulnerability that she had hidden for so long. He had always known her to be strong and confident, but now, as she spoke of her past, he saw a side of her he had never seen before, one filled with regret and sorrow. "I never meant for any of this to come between us," she whispered, "but now you know. And I can't take it back." The husband's heart ached as he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I wish you had told me sooner," he said, his voice soft, but filled with understanding. "But we can't change the past. All I know is that I love you, and that hasn't changed." The wife's eyes welled up with tears as she squeezed his hand. "I love you too, more than anything." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, the kind that only comes after years of knowing someone so deeply. Though the revelation had shaken him, the husband realized that the love they shared was still real, still strong. It had weathered the years, and it would continue to do so. Even with the secrets that had been hidden, the truth had finally come to light. And together, they would face whatever came next. The husband sat in silence for a long time after the conversation ended. His mind was swirling with everything his wife had just shared. It wasn't just the revelation of a past he didn't know about. It was the fact that his wife, the woman who had been his constant companion for more than 5 decades, had carried this burden alone. He could sense the guilt in her words, the pain she felt for not sharing it sooner. But even as these feelings filled him, there was something else, an understanding, a deep realization that the past could never be undone, but their present and future were still theirs to shape. The more he thought about it, the more he understood why she had kept this secret. It wasn't because she didn't love him, it was because she did. She had kept it hidden because she feared it would tear them apart. And for all those years, she had chosen to protect their love, believing that the truth would only bring more pain. She had loved him so much that she had carried this weight in silence, thinking it was the only way to preserve their life together. It was a heavy truth, but now that it was out in the open, it felt less like a burden and more like a stepping stone toward healing. "I never wanted you to feel betrayed," she said, her voice quieter now. "I just wanted us to have the life we built, to be happy with no shadows hanging over us. But I see now that keeping it hidden wasn't fair to you." She paused, looking at him with tear-filled eyes. "I'm sorry." Her apology wasn't just for the secret she had kept, but for the distance that had slowly crept between them, the unspoken gap that had begun to grow over time. And though the husband had felt that shift, he wasn't angry with her. Instead, he felt a surge of sympathy, a longing to comfort her as she had comforted him all these years. The reality of her past didn't change the love they shared. It only deepened his understanding of her. He reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "I understand," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I wish you had told me sooner, but I can't change that now. What matters is that we've always been there for each other, and that hasn't changed." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Her eyes met his, and for the first time in a long while, he saw a flicker of relief. She had been so afraid of losing him, of his judgment, but now it seemed like a weight had lifted off her shoulders. She nodded slowly, taking a deep breath, as if she had been holding it in for years. "I never wanted you to think differently of me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know now that you don't see me any differently, and that means everything to me." He smiled gently at her, wiping away a stray tear that had fallen down her cheek. "No, I don't. You're still the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. The one who cared for me, who built a life with me, and who gave me the best years of my life. Nothing's changed." For the first time in a long while, the room felt lighter. The silence that had once felt heavy now seemed full of understanding and love. They were no longer held back by secrets, and although the truth had been difficult to hear, it had brought them closer in a way that nothing else could have. The husband realized that love wasn't just about shared moments of happiness. It was about being there for each other in times of vulnerability, in facing the difficult truths, and still choosing to stand by one another. As the day wore on, they talked more about their past, their hopes for the time they had left, and what the future might hold. The past was still there, but it no longer held the same power over them. They had faced it together, and in doing so, had strengthened their bond in ways they hadn't expected. The husband didn't know how much longer he had, but he knew that whatever time remained, it would be filled with more honesty, more love, and more of the deep connection they had always shared. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. The days following their conversation felt different. There was a sense of peace in the air, one that neither of them had experienced in a long time. The weight of the past, though heavy, no longer seemed to hang over them. Instead, there was a new understanding between them, a deeper connection that transcended the years of shared memories and love. The husband could feel it in the way his wife spoke to him, the tenderness in her touch, the way she looked at him as though she had truly seen him, and he, in turn, could see her in ways he hadn't before. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect, or that the past had been erased. It wasn't that simple. But something had shifted. The truth had come to light, and with it, the walls that had quietly built up over the years began to fall away. The silence that once felt heavy now felt comfortable. They no longer had to hide anything from each other. Every word, every glance, Every touch now carried the weight of shared experience and a quiet acceptance of each other's flaws and strengths. In the days that followed, they found themselves doing simple things that felt more meaningful than ever before. The wife continued to care for him with the same devotion she always had, but now there was an ease to her actions. The husband, though weakened by his illness, found comfort in her presence, in the way she stayed by his side, never rushing through their time together. They spent hours talking about the past, both the good and the difficult times, and even laughed at old jokes they had long forgotten. There was no longer any need to rush through their days or avoid the hard conversations. Everything felt as it should be, real and unguarded. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a soft glow through the window, the husband sat by the window with his wife. He had always enjoyed these moments, the quiet stillness that settled over them as they watched the world outside. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, a beautiful reminder of the world's fleeting beauty. As he sat there, he thought about how much he had taken for granted all these years, the love, the partnership, the simple moments of peace they had shared. It wasn't until now, as time was running out, that he truly appreciated how lucky he had been. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft as he glanced over at her. "You've always been the strong one in this relationship, the one who held everything together. But now, I realize that I never really knew what you had been carrying all these years, all that weight you carried by yourself." She looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth and sadness. "I didn't want you to know," she said, her voice low. "I thought if I kept it hidden, if I didn't tell you, maybe it would be easier for both of us." He nodded, understanding now more than ever. "But it wasn't, was it? Hiding it only made it harder for both of us. I see that now. I see you for who you really are, and I love you even more for it." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she smiled softly, brushing them away with her hand. "I'm just so grateful you're still here with me. After everything." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fading light outside. There was no need for more words. Everything they needed to say had already been spoken. The husband knew that they had reached a place of understanding, one that had taken years to find. He had his regrets, of course, moments he wished he could change, things he wished he had done differently. But in this moment, surrounded by the woman he had loved for so long, those regrets didn't seem as important. What mattered was the love they had shared, the memories they had created, and the quiet peace they had found in the final chapter of their story. As the days went by, they continued to live each moment with a sense of quiet gratitude, knowing that whatever time was left, they would spend it together. The husband could feel his time running out, but he no longer feared it. He had come to terms with the fact that the end was near, but he was at peace. He had lived a full life, surrounded by love, and that was enough. The truth, no matter how painful it had been, had only strengthened their bond. And with that truth came a deep understanding that love, in its purest form, could withstand anything, even the secrets of the past. The days passed slowly, but in the quiet comfort of their home, the husband found a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. His health continued to decline, and while the end was inevitable, he no longer feared it. His wife was by his side every moment, her presence a constant source of solace. They spent their remaining time together, cherishing the small, quiet moments that had once seemed so ordinary, but now felt extraordinary. One afternoon, as he lay in bed, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The illness had drained him, but his mind was clear, and his heart was full. He had lived a long life, one filled with love, adventure, and everything in between. He thought about his wife, about how they had built this life together, how they had weathered so many storms side by side. Despite the secrets that had been kept, despite the hidden truths that had come to light, their bond had never been broken. If anything, it had grown stronger. His wife, sitting quietly beside him, seemed as though she, too, had found a kind of peace. She no longer wore the heavy burden of secrets. They had shared everything, and in doing so, they had found a deeper understanding of one another. He could see it in the way she looked at him, the tenderness in her touch, and the quiet acceptance in her eyes. She had always been his strength, but now he realized they were each other's strength in a way they had never been before. "I don't have many regrets," he said one evening, his voice soft but steady. She looked at him, her eyes full of love and concern. "I've lived a full life. The best part of it all was you." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "And you were the best part of mine," she whispered. The words were simple, but they held so much weight. They didn't need to say anything more. They had always communicated in ways that went beyond words, and in this moment, their silence spoke volumes. She continued to care for him, making sure he was comfortable and at peace, but the true gift they gave each other in those final days was their shared presence. Neither of them felt the need to rush, to hurry through time. They simply lived in the moment, savoring the love they had built and the memories they had made. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting the room in a warm golden light, the husband felt his strength beginning to fade. He was tired, but he wasn't afraid. He had come to terms with the inevitable, and all that mattered now was the love he felt for his wife. She was holding his hand, her gentle touch offering him comfort in his final moments. "I'm ready," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not afraid." His wife kissed his forehead, her tears falling softly. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I always will." The husband smiled weakly, his eyes closing as he drifted into a peaceful sleep. He knew that wherever he went, her love would stay with him. The life they had shared, the love they had built, was enough. It was more than enough. When he passed away that night, there was no fear, no regret, just the quiet comfort of knowing that he had loved and been loved, and that the truth, no matter how painful, had only strengthened the bond between them. His wife was left with a heart full of memories, but also with the peace that comes from knowing that the love they shared would never fade. In the days that followed, as she looked through the photos, the letters, and all the memories of their life together, she knew that their story wasn't over. Their love, though no longer physical, was timeless. It had shaped who they both were and would continue to live on in the space they had created together. And in that quiet, unspoken connection, the husband remained with her, always.